The ceremonial chalice felt like a block of ice in my hands, its gilded surface a cruel mirror reflecting the thousand glittering courtiers who had gathered to watch my final humiliation. It was the day of ascension, the day the heir to the Duchy of Silverwood was formally named. It was supposed to have been my day. Instead, my stepsister Lyra stood beside our father, radiant in a gown of spun moonlight that had been intended for me. My own dress was a drab, ill-fitting thing of gray wool, a deliberate insult from my stepmother, Serafina. She stood on father's other side, her lips curved in a serene, victorious smile that didn't reach the cold chips of obsidian she had for eyes. My loyal subjects, my father, Duke Valerius began, his voice booming across the silent throne room. Today we cement the future of our great duchy. A tremor ran through me, a phantom ache that was more memory than reality. I knew what came next. I knew the taste of the wine in this chalice. It was sweet, cloyingly so, laced with the odorless, colorless poison known as the serpent's kiss. In another life, I had drunk it down eagerly, believing it was a toast to my future. I had felt the fire crawl through my veins, the paralysis that stole my breath, my vision blurring as Lyra's triumphant face was the last thing I saw. I had died on this very dais, a confused, betrayed girl of 18, but this was not that life. For years, I have watched my daughters grow, the Duke continued, his gaze flicking to me for a fraction of a second, filled not with fatherly affection, but with a cold, dismissive pity. One has shown the grace, wisdom, and strength required to lead Silverwood into a new era of prosperity. I looked at Serafina, my stepmother, the architect of my ruin, the faintest tightening around her eyes, the minute twitch of her manicured fingers. I recognized them now. They were the tells of a predator closing in on her prey. She thought me a lamb, just as I had been before. A weak, grieving daughter, easily swept aside for her own blood. Lyra preened under the court's admiring gaze. She was beautiful, I couldn't deny it, with our father's golden hair and her mother's sharp, cunning features. She played the part of the perfect daughter, while behind closed doors she was a viper, whispering poison into our father's ear about my supposed incompetence, my frailness, my unsuitability to rule. Therefore, it is with immense pride that I name my successor, the Duke declared, his voice ringing with false sincerity. He raised a hand, gesturing not to me, the firstborn, the true heir by blood-in-law, but to her. Duchess Apparent Lyra of House Valerius. A gasp rippled through the court, quickly smothered by polite, if surprised, applause. This was it, the moment of betrayal sealed and delivered before the entire world. Lyra curtsied elegantly, a picture of demure humility. Serafina's smile widened, a crack in her mask of civility. She caught my eye and lifted her own chalice in a silent, mocking toast. Drink, her eyes said. Drink and be done with. My hand tightened on the stem of my cup. The bitter tang of almonds, the ghost of the poison from my past life, filled my senses. They expected me to weep, to protest, to make a scene and prove my unsuitability. Then, to drink the wine in a fit of despair and quietly disappear from their lives forever. That is what happened the first time. This time I smiled back. It was a small, sharp thing, a shard of glass in the suffocating softness of the court. I saw the flicker of confusion on Serafina's face, the faltering of Lyra's perfect posture. My father frowned, annoyed by this unexpected deviation from the script. I raised the chalice not to my lips, but to them. A toast to their treachery, a promise of the storm that was to come. They thought this was their victory. They had no idea it was the beginning of their end. Because I hadn't just come back from the dead. I had come back with a decade of memories they didn't have, a map of their every weakness, and a promise I had whispered into the void as my first life faded. You will pay. The chalice was heavy with more than just poisoned wine. It was heavy with the weight of my vengeance. And I was finally strong enough to serve it. My first life was a tapestry woven with grief and neglect. My mother, the true Duchess of Silverwood, died when I was only 6. She was my sun, my shield, and her passing left my world in perpetual twilight. My father, Duke Valerius, shattered by her death, sealed himself away. He was a man hollowed out by sorrow, and he had no room left for a daughter who looked so much like his lost wife. I grew up in the shadow of his grief, raised by governesses and tutors who were instructed to keep me quiet and out of his sight. I was a ghost in my own home, a living reminder of a love he could no longer bear. Then, when I was 10, Serafina arrived. She was a minor countess from a neighboring province, a widow with a daughter, Lyra, who was my age. She was beautiful, charming, and masterfully manipulative. She saw the vacuum in my father's life and filled it with practiced perfection. She soothed his sorrow, managed his household, and whispered compliments that slowly rebuilt his fractured ego. Within a year, she was the new Duchess of Silverwood. Her arrival marked the beginning of my systematic erasure. At first, it was subtle. My favorite dresses would go missing, only to appear later, refitted for Lyra. My tutors would praise Lyra's intelligence, while pointing out my daydreaming and lack of focus. My father, so eager for peace and a semblance of happiness, accepted Serafina's version of reality without question. Lyra was bright and diligent. I was moody and withdrawn. Lyra was a social butterfly. I was painfully shy. The cruelty escalated as we grew older. Serafina would intercept letters from my maternal grandparents, the rulers of the powerful northern kingdom of Glaciaris, and write back forging my signature, filling the pages with tales of my delinquency and disrespect until they stopped writing altogether. She cultivated my isolation, ensuring I had no allies, no friends, no one to confide in. When I tried to excel at my studies, proving my fitness to rule, the pages of my research would be accidentally destroyed by a spilled inkwell on Lyra's part. When a young, handsome baron showed interest in me, Lyra spread a vicious rumor that I was barren, and he quickly turned his attentions elsewhere. They were masters of psychological warfare. My father, blinded by his devotion to his new wife, saw only what she wanted him to see: a perfect, charming daughter in Lyra and a difficult, disappointing one in me. I was starved of affection, of acknowledgement, of love. I became the scapegoat for every problem, the shadow that made Lyra shine all the brighter. The final betrayal began a year before my 18th birthday, the age of my ascension. Serafina began adding small, almost undetectable doses of a slow-acting poison to my food and drink. It was a viciously clever choice, a concoction derived from a rare mountain flower that mimicked the symptoms of a nervous disposition. I became prone to tremors, bouts of dizziness, and a creeping fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure. The court physicians, their palms greased with Serafina's gold, diagnosed me with female hysteria, a condition that conveniently rendered me unfit for the burdens of leadership. It was the perfect coup. I was too weak, too sickly, too unstable. Lyra, meanwhile, was the very picture of health and vitality. The narrative was set. My father, with a heavy heart full of manufactured regret, was easily convinced that disinheriting me was not an act of cruelty, but a kindness. He was saving me from a responsibility I couldn't handle. On the day of the ceremony in that first life, I truly believed him. I felt like a failure. When he named Lyra as his heir, I was heartbroken but resigned. I accepted the gilded chalice from Serafina's hand, believing her soft words of comfort. "A toast, my dear Alara," she had murmured, her voice like honeyed venom. "To your health and happiness, free from the burdens of the throne." I drank. The poison this time was not the slow, insidious kind. It was the serpent's kiss, swift and absolute. The fire started in my stomach and spread with blinding speed. I collapsed, my body convulsing. My father cried out in shock, a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. But I saw the truth in Serafina's and Lyra's eyes. There was no surprise there. Only cold, hard triumph. As my world went black, their smiling faces were etched into my soul. I expected nothingness, an eternal, silent void. Instead, I felt a violent, wrenching pull, as if my spirit were being dragged backward through time. I gasped, and the air that filled my lungs was the sweet, clean air of my childhood nursery. My hands were small, my limbs short. I was 6 years old again, lying in my bed. The morning sun was streaming through the window, the same window I had stared out of on the day my mother was buried. I heard a maid's voice down the hall, humming a tune that had been popular a dozen years ago. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't the afterlife, it was a second chance. The first few years of my second life were the hardest. I had the mind and memories of a murdered 18-year-old trapped inside the body of a child. I had to relearn how to walk without stumbling, how to speak without using words far beyond my age. I had to endure the phantom pains of a death I hadn't yet suffered, and I had to watch my mother wither and die all over again, powerless to stop the illness that claimed her. I held her hand as she faded, the grief as raw and real as it was the first time. But this time it was sharpened by the bitter knowledge of the betrayals to come. When Serafina and Lyra arrived, I played my part. I was the quiet, withdrawn child they remembered. I let them underestimate me. I watched them, studied them, not as a victim, but as a predator studying its prey. I noted every weakness, every hidden vanity, every secret deal. While Lyra was learning needlepoint and courtly dances, I was devouring books in the library: history, military strategy, economics, and, most importantly, toxicology. I learned to identify every poison native to the continent. I learned their properties, their antidotes, and their uses. I knew I couldn't simply expose them. Serafina was too cunning. She would twist any accusation I made and use it as further proof of my instability. My father was a lost cause, a man who chose blissful ignorance over painful truth. No, if I wanted justice, I couldn't rely on anyone in this gilded cage. I had to build my own cage and forge my own key. My unfair advantage wasn't magic or a secret power. It was memory. It was knowledge. It was a 12-year head start on the enemies who thought I was just a sad little girl. And I would use every single second of it to prepare for the day I would not only survive their betrayal, but turn it back on them with the force of a tidal wave. The throne was my birthright, and this time, I would not be cheated out of it. This time, I would take it. The moment I set the poisoned chalice back on the table, untouched, a silent declaration of war had been made. The faint, knowing smile I gave my stepmother was the spark, and in the days that followed, I began to fan the flames. My decision to fight back hadn't been a single dramatic epiphany. It had been a slow, cold hardening of my heart over 12 long years of biding my time. My second childhood was my training ground, and the day of ascension was simply the first battle. My plan was a web with 3 main anchors, 3 sources of power my father had foolishly discarded, 3 allies I had failed to cultivate in my first life. Now, armed with foreknowledge, I would claim them as my own. The first anchor was the Northern Lords. In my previous life, my father, seeking to centralize his power, had levied punishing taxes on the hardy, independent lords of the Northern Territories. He saw them as rustic barbarians and ignored their pleas for aid when a blight struck their crops, causing a devastating famine that cost thousands of lives. He alienated them, breeding a deep resentment that simmered for years. I remembered the names of the most powerful lords, Lord Grayson of Stonefall and Lady Maeve of the Ironwood. At the age of 15, 3 years before the ceremony, I faked an interest in ancient cartography. I spent weeks in the ducal archives, ostensibly studying old maps. In reality, I was memorizing trade routes, geological surveys, and crop rotation schedules. I penned an anonymous but highly detailed report predicting the coming blight with uncanny accuracy, outlining a new method of crop rotation using blight-resistant grains I'd read about in an obscure agricultural text. I included detailed plans for new irrigation channels that would tap into the mountain springs. I sent the report via a trusted stable hand to Lord Grayson. He was skeptical, but the science was sound, and out of desperation, he implemented my suggestions. When the blight came a year later, as I knew it would, the rest of the North suffered. But Lord Grayson's lands, and those of his ally Lady Maeve, whom he had convinced, had a bumper crop. They became the breadbasket of the North, saving their people and amassing immense wealth and loyalty. They searched for their anonymous benefactor, but I remained a ghost. They only knew the help had come from within the capital. I had planted the seed of an alliance, proving I understood and valued them in a way their duke never had. The second anchor was Captain Valerius, a man ironically sharing my family name but no relation. He was the most brilliant mercenary commander on the continent. leader of the formidable company known as the Crimson Griffins. My father had hired him to quell an uprising in the south, promising him land and title upon his victory. Valerius succeeded, but my father, paranoid about a popular mercenary captain with his own army, reneged on the deal. He paid Valerius his fee in gold but refused the land, publicly humiliating him. The captain, a man of fierce pride, left Silverwood swearing he would never serve House Valerius again. I knew when and where my father would betray him. 2 years before the ceremony, I used my personal allowance, money I had been painstakingly saving, to hire a messenger. I sent Captain Valerius a simple unsigned note. It contained only the date and location of a secret meeting between my father and his advisors and a single sentence. A promise of paper is not a promise of stone. Heeded by the warning, Captain Valerius demanded his payment in land up front. My father, caught off guard and desperate for the captain's skills, had no choice but to cede the fortress and lands of Blackwood Reach before the campaign even began. When the uprising was crushed, Valerius was already a landed lord, his position secure. He owed his title and his security to a mysterious informant. He, too, began to discreetly ask questions in the capital, searching for the source of the warning. The third and most powerful anchor was my maternal grandmother, Queen Astrid of Glaciaris. In my first life, Seraphina's campaign of lies had completely severed my connection to her. I died, believing my own grandmother wanted nothing to do with me. This time, I understood the game. Starting at age 12, I began writing to her in secret. I didn't use the official ducal couriers, who I knew reported to my stepmother. I used traveling merchants and bards, bribing them to carry my letters north. I didn't complain about my life. That would have sounded like the childish whining Seraphina had fabricated. Instead, I wrote to her about my studies. I discussed the philosophies of governance, the history of our shared bloodline, and my mother. I asked her for stories, for guidance, for a connection to the woman I barely remembered. My letters were intelligent, thoughtful, and full of a quiet strength. I was reintroducing myself to her, showing her the granddaughter I truly was, not the one from Seraphina's poison pen. After a year of cautious correspondence, she invited me to visit. Seraphina, of course, forbade it, claiming the journey was too dangerous for my delicate constitution. This was the moment I had prepared for. I accidentally let my father overhear me weeping to my handmaiden about how I would never be able to honor my mother's memory by meeting her family. I played the part of the dutiful, heartbroken daughter perfectly. My father, pricked by a rare pang of guilt, overruled Seraphina for the first time in years. My month in the glacial, glittering court of Glaciaris was a revelation. Queen Astrid was a formidable woman with eyes as shrewd and blue as a winter sky. She tested me, questioned me, and watched me. I met her scrutiny with honesty and intelligence. I showed her my knowledge of statecraft, my love for my people, and the fire I kept hidden at home. I never spoke a word against my stepmother, but I didn't have to. The queen saw the truth in the quiet resilience of the granddaughter she had almost lost. When I left with her secret, ironclad promise of support. "The blood of the wolf runs in your veins, child," she had told me, clasping a pendant shaped like a snarling wolf's head into my hand. "Never forget that." My web was woven. The famine-proof lords, the loyal mercenary captain, and the powerful queen of the north. They were my army in waiting. All I had to do was feign weakness, endure the final barbs and insults, and walk into that throne room on my 18th birthday, ready to spring the trap I had spent 12 years building. The air in the throne room crackled with anticipation after my small act of defiance. I placed the chalice on a nearby attendance tray, my movements calm and deliberate. Across the dais, I saw Seraphina's eyes narrow. This was not the reaction of the broken, hysterical girl she had spent years creating. This was something else, something she couldn't control. For the next hour, I endured. I stood silently as speaker after speaker extolled Lyra's virtues, her grace, her intelligence, her readiness to lead. Every word of praise for her was an implicit condemnation of me. I felt the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes, some filled with pity, others with scorn. I kept my expression neutral, my posture straight, my gaze fixed on the great ancestral tapestry behind the throne, which depicted the founding of our duchy. It showed my ancestor, a warrior duchess, leading her troops into battle, a reminder of the strength in my bloodline, a strength they had tried so desperately to erase. Finally, the speech is concluded. My father stepped forward to perform the final act of the ceremony, the presentation of the heir's signet, the ring that marked the successor. He held the heavy gold ring, its deep blue sapphire gleaming in the candlelight. "Lyra," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "with this ring I name you heir to the Duchy of Silverwood. May you rule with wisdom and—" "A moment, father." My voice, though quiet, cut through the throne room like a blade. A collective gasp went through the crowd. No one interrupted the Duke, ever. My father froze, his hand hovering over Lyra's. He turned to me, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "Elara, what is the meaning of this? You will not make a scene here." "I have no intention of making a scene," I said, taking a step forward. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a wild drumbeat of fear and exhilaration. This was it, the point of no return. I merely wished to offer my own tribute to my sister's ascension. A gift. Serafina stepped forward, her hand on my father's arm. "My dear, this is hardly the time or the place," she said, her voice a silken threat. "Your sister is being honored." "And it is in that spirit of honor that I offer this," I replied, my gaze locking with hers. I gave a subtle nod to the captain of the household guard, a man whose starving family I had secretly supported for years. He returned the nod and stepped back, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. As if on cue, the great oaken doors of the throne room boomed, once, twice. Then they burst inward, splintering off their iron hinges. The court cried out in alarm, nobles scrambling back as armored soldiers began to file into the room. They were not the ducal guard with their silver and blue livery. These men were clad in black iron and gray wolf pelts. Their banners bore the snarling wolf's head of Glaciaris and the stone shield of House Grayson. At their head walked two figures. The first was Lord Grayson, his face grim, his hand on the pommel of a massive broadsword. Beside him was Lady Maeve, her expression as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. They strode to the center of the room and knelt before me. "Lord Grayson, Lady Maeve," I said, my voice now ringing with an authority no one in this room had ever heard from me. "You and the combined forces of the Northern Lords are welcome in my court." My father stared, dumbfounded. "Grayson, what is this treason?" "There is no treason here, Duke Valerius," Grayson boomed, rising to his feet. "Only loyalty, loyalty to the true heir of Silverwood." Before my father could respond, a second commotion erupted from the courtyard. A new sound. The rhythmic tramp of disciplined boots and the clank of professional steel. Into the throne room marched 100 soldiers in crimson-plumed helmets. They moved with a lethal grace that made the household guard look like clumsy children. Leading them was Captain Valerius, his armor scarred from a dozen campaigns, a wry smile on his face. "Captain!" my father sputtered, his face turning pale. "Your contract is with the duchy." "My contract is with the one who honors their promises," Valerius called out, his voice a gravelly rasp. He, too, stopped before me and offered a crisp salute. "The Crimson Griffins are at your command, Lady Elara." Serafina looked as though she had been struck. Lyra was white as a sheet, her perfect composure shattered. My father could only stammer, looking from me to the assembled soldiers and back again. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice a weak imitation of its usual command. "An insurrection? This is madness." "This is not madness, father. This is justice," I said, my voice hard as the northern stone. I turned to face the stunned court. For 12 years, I have been a ghost in my own home. I have been called weak, unstable, and unfit. These accusations did not spring from nowhere. They were planted, cultivated, and watered with lies by a woman who coveted my mother's throne. I pointed a trembling, accusing finger at Serafina. My stepmother, Duchess Serafina, has systematically plotted to disinherit and destroy me. She has lied to my family in the north, isolating me from my own blood. She has bribed physicians to diagnose me with fictitious ailments. And tonight, she attempted to finish her work. I walked to the attendance tray and picked up the chalice I had refused. This wine is poisoned with the serpent's kiss, a toxin that causes a swift, agonizing death easily mistaken for a sudden seizure in someone of a supposed nervous disposition. Panic erupted. Serafina's face was a mask of pure fury and denial. Lies! The girl is hysterical! Seize her! But the household guard did not move. Their captain stood firm. My soldiers, the Griffins and the Northern warriors, drew their swords, the sound of 1,000 blades clearing their scabbards echoing in the cavernous room. The court froze. "Proof!" Serafina shrieked. "You have no proof!" "Don't I?" I asked calmly. I pulled a small, sealed vial from a hidden pocket in my dress. "When you began poisoning me in my first life, you used a slow-acting agent derived from the black lotus flower. It builds in the system, is difficult to detect, but leaves a unique residue in the victim's hair. I have been saving strands of my hair for the last 2 years. They have been tested by an apothecary loyal to me, and they tell a very clear story. This vial contains the results." I tossed the vial to Lord Grayson, who caught it deftly. "Furthermore," I continued, my voice rising, "your personal maid, Anya, has a brother who owes a significant gambling debt. A debt that was mysteriously paid off by a line of credit from the Duchess's private accounts just last week. Anya, under questioning, has confessed to witnessing you procure the serpent's kiss from a disgraced alchemist in the lower city. Captain Valerius's men have already apprehended him. I imagine he will be quite eager to talk in exchange for his life." Serafina's face crumbled. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving only the painted mask of her makeup. She was caught, utterly and completely caught. I turned to my father. He looked broken, his world collapsing around him. "Father, you have been a pawn. Your grief for my mother made you blind, and she used that blindness to turn you against your own blood. You betrayed me for a lie." Then I faced Lyra. She was crying now, the pretty, delicate tears of a villain who has been caught. "And you," I said, my voice softening with a sliver of pity that I quickly crushed. "You were so eager for a title you didn't earn. You were willing to stand by and watch your mother murder me for it. You are as guilty as she is." As the weight of my words settled, a new presence made itself known. The soldiers at the door parted, and a figure strode into the throne room, flanked by 20 of the most elite warriors I had ever seen, their armor gleaming like polished ice. It was a woman, tall and regal, with a crown of woven silver on her white hair and my mother's piercing blue eyes. My grandmother, Queen Astrid of Glaciaris, had arrived. "Duke Valerius," she said, her voice echoing with the absolute authority of a true monarch. "You have allowed a viper to nest in your house. You have wronged my blood. You have forsaken your daughter. For that, you are no longer fit to rule." She walked past my cowering father, past my catatonic stepmother, and past my sobbing stepsister. She stopped in front of me, her severe face softening as she looked down at me. "The Duchy of Silverwood was founded by a queen of my line," she declared to the entire court. "It is time it was ruled by one again." She took my hand and raised it high for all to see. "I, Queen Astrid of Glaciaris, recognize my granddaughter, Alara of House Valerius, as the one true ruler of this land. All hail Duchess Alara." Captain Valerius was the first to act. He slammed his fist over his heart and knelt. "Hail, Duchess Alara!" he roared. Lord Grayson and Lady Maeve knelt beside him, their voices joining his. "Hail, Duchess Alara!" Then, a wave of motion swept the room as soldier after soldier, Northman and mercenary alike, knelt before me. The members of the court, seeing the absolute shift in power, quickly followed suit, their allegiances changing as swiftly as the tide. Soon, the entire room, save for my ruined family, was on one knee. The throne was mine. Not by birthright, not by my father's decree, but by my own hand. I had returned not just with an army, but with the truth, and with it, I had taken everything. In the year that followed, I remade Silverwood. The rot that had set in under my father's neglect and Serafina's corruption ran deep, but I was a meticulous gardener. My first act as Duchess was to deliver justice. Serafina and Lyra were tried for high treason and attempted regicide. The evidence was overwhelming. The alchemist confessed. Anya testified. And the apothecary's analysis of my hair sealed their fate. They were stripped of all titles and lands. Serafina, the master manipulator, was sentenced to life in the Silent Sisters convent, a place of harsh penance on a windswept, isolated island where vows of silence were absolute. She would live out her days without the one weapon she held so dear, her voice. I heard whispers that she went mad within the first 6 months. Lyra, for her part, was judged to be a pawn in her mother's game, albeit a willing one. My grandmother advised mercy, stating that a ruler who can show clemency is a ruler who inspires loyalty. I exiled her. She was sent penniless to a distant continent, with nothing but the clothes on her back. The girl who had craved a title above all else was now a nobody, forced to make her own way in a world that cared nothing for her beauty or her name. It was a fate more fitting than a swift execution. My father was the most difficult to deal with. He was guilty of weakness and willful blindness, not malice. He was broken by the revelations, a hollowed-out man who had lost his wife, his honor, and the respect of his people. I did not imprison him. I did not exile him. I gave him the one thing he had given me for most of my life: neglect. He was permitted to live out his days in a secluded wing of the castle, stripped of all authority. He became the ghost I once was, a forgotten man wandering the halls, a living testament to the consequences of choosing comfort over truth. Sometimes I would see him from a distance, watching me as I held court, his eyes filled with a profound, desolate regret. It was a punishment more complete than any dungeon. With justice served, I turned to governance. I named Lord Grayson my hand, his wisdom and pragmatism balancing my own fiery resolve. Lady Maeve became my master of coin, her shrewd mind quickly untangling Serafina's web of debt and revitalizing the duchy's treasury. Captain Valerius was made the commander of my armies, his crimson griffins integrated with the ducal guard to create the most formidable fighting force in the southern lands. My council was made of loyal, competent people who had earned their positions, not schemed for them. I honored the promises my father had broken. I lowered the taxes on the northern territories and invested ducal funds into their infrastructure, building the irrigation canals I had designed as a girl. The North bloomed, and their loyalty to me became absolute. I established fair trade agreements, funded schools, and cleared out the corrupt officials who had preyed on the populace for years. Silverwood began to heal. It began to prosper. My relationship with my grandmother deepened into one of mutual respect and genuine affection. We were allies, two rulers of wolf blood, bound by family and a shared vision for the future. Her support ensured that no opportunistic neighbors dared to test my new regime. I ruled not from a place of fear or revenge, but from the hard-won wisdom of my past life. I knew the value of a loyal ally, the danger of a whispered lie, and the importance of seeing people for who they truly are, not who they pretend to be. I was no longer the timid, overlooked girl. I was Ilara the Avenger, Ilara the Restorer, Duchess of a renewed and thriving Silverwood. One evening, a year after my ascension, I stood on the same balcony where Serafina had once stood, looking down on a city bustling with prosperous, happy people. The air was clean, the future was bright. I held the heir's signet in my hand, the ring my father had tried to give to Lyra. I had taken it from him that night and had not put it on until my formal coronation. It felt cool and heavy on my finger, a symbol not of what was given to me, but of what I had seized. I had been betrayed for a title, a piece of metal and a name. In return, I had taken the throne, the power, and the future. I had lost a family but gained a kingdom. And as I watched the sun set over my city, I felt a sense of peace that had been denied to me for 2 lifetimes. The ghosts of the past were finally silent. I was home. I was free. And I was queen of my own destiny.